New all-time high. Are we gonna have a pullback before continuing up, or up and only from now on? We're gonna talk a little bit about some on-chain data, rate cuts, trueflation, and some macroeconomics landscape that I want to talk about on the US dollar that is going to impact Bitcoin. What's up, everybody, and welcome to Bitcoin Predator. We just broke new all-time high, so the big question right now is what's gonna happen next? Are we gonna have a pullback before continuing going up? How much is gonna be this pullback? Or can we expect just a short squeeze and then the parabolic phase will start? So as you know, we are still in the third year of the bull run, and we can estimate that we have around 117 days before the end of the year, thus the start of the bear market. So Bitcoin has behaving quite nicely above the 100,000 level on a consolidation, grabbing liquidity up and down, and we are just waiting for that time to have the next blow off top. On the daily time frame, I can easily identify a daily fair value gap right here around the 104,500 level and 103,400 level. So this gap has not been filled yet. However, if we zoom into the 4-hour time frame, we're gonna find some points of interest. We can't consider this first 4-hour order block right here to be invalidated. This is because the price being pushed here was not enough to break this level, changing the structure at the 108,900,000. So we're gonna have to remove it and evaluate other possible outcomes. The next order block that I want to evaluate is this one at the 104,900 and 106,000 level. Although we had quite an interesting push to the upside right here, you will notice that as soon as the price broke the structure at the 108,900,000 level, the price came back down quickly. This means that this 4-hour order block right here is not valid. So we can also remove it from our points of interest. Now, although we have this 4-hour time frame and the fair value gap on the daily, I know that on the 4-hour this fair value gap has been mitigated. However, since the daily time frame has a stronger bias compared to the 4-hour time frame, I still want to consider this daily fair value gap. And today we got that 4-hour order block that pushed the price to the upside, breaking the 110,000 level, reaching the new all-time high at 112K, and in the 4-hour that candle closed above. This makes this 4-hour order block extremely strong. So this is how I expect the price to behave over the next few days. I'm clearly expecting this price to go as further as the 108,500, maybe 107,900 level. This will be the best scenario, but Bitcoin is quite tricky, and I know that the price behaves with quite aggressive liquidity sweeps. So we also have to prepare for a second scenario in which the price will go as further as the daily fair value gap at the 103,900 level before continuing its way up. And when you look at this region at 104, 105, 107, so on and so forth, when you have a look at the liquidation heat map, we just got around 17 million liquidated today because of that upside. And as soon as that level was liquidated, a huge amount of liquidity started to form right below the level at the 108,000 level, and we already have 18,000 of USD of liquidation available. When I zoom out to the 1 week time frame for the liquidation heat map, I still see, you're gonna see that right here at the 105, we still have 20,000 and guess 57 million on the 107. So that's why when I look at the price action, I still think the price might go a little bit further before continuing its way up, which is fine because I'm still bullish on Bitcoin. Now, when you zoom out a little bit further, you will notice that around the 100,000 level, we start to have a gap of liquidity around this region right here. So I still believe that as further as this 103, 104,000 level, we might have some liquidity grabs before continuing its way up. And going back a little bit to the daily time frame, how much further the price can go. When I mentioned the 104, 105,000 level, it also adds into confluence the 60-day cycle low. According to the 60-day cycle, the previous daily cycle low was on the beginning, was at the end of June at the 98,300 level. It has been a while since we don't see the 100,000 level touch, since the broke up at 97,900. If we're gonna respect the next 60-day cycles and take the theory of right translation, the cycle cannot go as further as the previous 60-day cycle low. So that's why I believe this is the most possible region before we continue our way up and confirming the right translation of the 60-day cycle before the next 60-day cycle low and continue its way up. So I know we see many traders, many Twitter and X influencers, many YouTubers screaming all-time high saying that the parabolic stage started up and only. And as much as I would like this to be true, and trust me, I really wish this to be true, I'm the kind of trader who has to be prepared for the worst. Like I mentioned in my previous videos, big institutions, they play with your patience. They bored you to death, especially the day traders and leverage traders, which you can confirm by this liquidation heat map right here. Everyone is getting swiped out before continuing its way up. So during this week, I took some time to understand exactly what's going on with the Bitcoin price and what can be the biggest catalyst of the next parabolic move. If we take into account the global liquidity index, although it is deviating a little bit for Bitcoin in the short term, I still think the price will catch up eventually. We know that we cannot trust the correlation 100% of the time because we have seen several times when the price deviated a little bit from the M2 global liquidity. And that is okay. It just happens. In the market, there is nothing 100% true. So with the institution participating even more in the Bitcoin price and more variables impacting how traders and big institutions interact with Bitcoin, I started to ask myself what exactly is driving Bitcoin price. And the first thing I want to talk about is the S&P 500. Many people say that Bitcoin is lagging behind, whereas Nasdaq and the S&P 500 have already reached all-time high and Bitcoin only reached all-time high today. But can I tell you something personally? I think it's the opposite. Bitcoin already reached all-time high months ago, after the correction of the tariffs and after the war and before the war, Bitcoin already reached all-time high, and only after that the S&P 500 and Nasdaq catch up with Bitcoin. So although Bitcoin has a strong correlation with the S&P 500, I still think that it is quite an interesting spot that Bitcoin is considered among traders and investors. I think it is right between the gold and the S&P 500. Bitcoin is starting to behave as a safe asset similar to gold, but not as much as gold, whereas it is also considered a risky asset like the S&P 500 and stocks, but not so safe compared to the S&P 500, who has been in the market for many years. So sometimes you're going to see this behavior happening all the time. Correlation starts and then turns off a little bit. Bitcoin price goes up, whereas S&P 500 stays flat for a while. So I started to ask myself, what's going to be the next catalyst for making the Bitcoin price to go up? And for that, we have to talk about the reserve currency of the world, the USD. So there are many things going on geopolitical aspects, fiscal policy side of things that I want to talk about that might actually deeply influence Bitcoin price. The first one is the big beautiful bill that I personally call the big Bitcoin beautiful bill. So after investigating deeply what this bill is about and how it is going to impact Bitcoin, here are my conclusions. The first one, the impact of the big beautiful bill on Bitcoin is going to be long term. That's the biggest edge. This is because the big beautiful bill is going to de-dollarize the world. The USD is going to lose its value in the long term by adding a $3.4 trillion of deficit. And that debt is going to have to be monetized, which means printing. In order to pay that huge debt, the Fed's going to have to print more and more money, which is going to drive the USD price down. So I think we're going to feel the impact of that in the long term, maybe 3, 5, or 10 years from now. There's also another aspect that we're gonna have to talk about is that traders, investors, and other countries are going to lose the confidence in the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. And when shit hits the fan, people are going to start to put their money on gold or who knows, maybe on Bitcoin. And this can be confirmed when you take a look at the top assets by market cap. Over the last few months, you see Bitcoin going up and up and up on the market cap. It is right now between the 6 biggest assets on the planet. It has actually passed Alphabet. We know there's still a long way to reach gold, but you can see that Bitcoin is gaining ground as time goes by. So that's why I also mentioned that the spot that Bitcoin is currently, according to brokers, traders, and institutions, is in a quite interesting spot between gold as a reserve currency and the S&P 500 as a risky asset. And I think this is a really nice spot and it should stay that way. Now we also have to talk about the Genius Act. And this impact is going to be midterm, if it works. The Genius Act is going to use US Treasury reserves as a back for the USD stablecoins. That's why they call the Genius Act. They're going to pretty much pay the US debt using the dollars gathered from the USD stablecoins across the globe. So it is a quite interesting move. And whenever we talk about money flow for the USD stablecoins, we want to talk about from fiat to stablecoin, and eventually people are going to start noticing more and more about Bitcoin. By increasing the Bitcoin adoption, we're also going to find that the crypto infrastructure is going to increase because of the Genius Act, especially after the US clearly adopts Bitcoin. You're going to see more ETFs, crypto exchanges, Bitcoin treasury, not only in the US, but also on the entire planet. So in the midterm and as well maybe in the long term, I think the Genius Act is going to be a huge leverage for Bitcoin. However, we have to talk about the short term that is holding Bitcoin and the entire market back, which is the Fed and the rate cuts. And this is what's going on, guys. The Fed and especially Powell, it's holding the rate cuts. He is holding a ticking bomb on his lap, because everyone is expecting rate cuts because the market is still strong and inflation is under control. The problem is that the data coming for the Fed has a big delay. And one of the things that I truly think that made Bitcoin prices spike today is the trueflation. When you look at the trueflation, since the end of June, beginning of July, it has gone down tremendously. The tariffs policy started on April. So we can assume with a high level of confidence that the tariffs did not actually pose big impact into inflation. And I think that the market is starting to ignore Powell because of that, in a sense. Because yeah, the trueflation behavior started to increase after the tariffs, but now it has a sharp drop. And I think it's going to behave similarly to what we had at the end of 2024, just going way down. So personally, I don't think there's a reason for Powell to keep the rates as they are. And everyone across the globe are inquiring why he hasn't lowered the rates. Powell cannot keep saying that he doesn't have enough data, he doesn't know what's going to happen because of the tariffs, because he has to do whatever he has to do with the data that is already available. And the truth is, the tariffs are not impacting inflation. So there is a tug of war going on right here that the entire market is already wasted. And as soon as he lowered those rates, parabolic will take over the entire market. And if we have a timing similar to what we have previously, the dollar will be around this region right here, which if you take a look at the past and how Bitcoin behaved during this time, when the dollar was below the 92,000, that's exactly when the Bitcoin price started to go actually parabolic. But you see how interesting times are for Bitcoin. Although the USD has been going further down, Bitcoin price is still going up. So it is quite interesting to see what's going to happen next. In the meantime, we still see institutions such as ETFs still with huge inflows of capital into Bitcoin. We had some outflows recently, but not a big deal, nothing significant, so there is still a lot of inflows for Bitcoin. At the same time, we see that the exchange reserve for Bitcoin is still draining. On my next video, I saw it was at 2.4 million, right now it is at 2.3. And yes, this is how institutions behave, we are still consolidating. If you haven't watched my video where I explained how institutions move the price of Bitcoin, go watch that video right now so you can understand that a supply shock is imminent. And quite interestingly, although we are quite close to the new all-time high, actually we just passed the all-time high at the 112, we see that there is some sort of divergence between the Bitcoin price and the Fear and Greed Index. Right now we are at the 52 level, neutral, and we already passed the new all-time high. So I still think this is great news. I mean, we still have a lot of ground to cover before going parabolic. In the meantime, I still think we have a long way to go to the top because the MVRVZ score is still showing bullish momentum. I think we are behaving similar to what we had in between 2016 and 2018 before continuing its way up and getting parabolic. Of course, not in the same intensity because this cycle is different because of institution participation, but I still believe we're gonna get some parabolic move before the end of the year. And like I said, the biggest catalyst for that, unfortunately, we're gonna have to wait, is the September rate cuts. The rate cuts probably had just increased to 64% on September. I think we're still not gonna have any rate cuts in July, but this puts more pressure into Jerome Powell to cut the rates this year. Meanwhile, we have more news of Bitcoin adoption and more companies using Bitcoin as a collateral for business loans. This is good because now Bitcoin is considered a portfolio to be used against and increase companies' assets. And we also have business people and politicians in general still adopting Bitcoin, like Elon Musk, who just created the America Party. I'm not here to talk about politics, if I'm in favor or against it, but it just shows that Bitcoin is used nonetheless as a weapon for the public adoption. Tell me what you guys think in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you on the next video.